Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti. Ora cambierò la mia presentazione in inglese, poi gli altri ospiti ovviamente potranno fare l'italiano in inglese perché stasera per noi è un momento molto importante. We have a welcome Max Pog, and most of you know Max Pog is one of the important experts in the environment of startup studios and venture builder. I know Max how long? 2-3 years ago when I started to explore this the environment of startup studio. And when I started FoolFarm, I started to understand something about this model, reading what Max is writing in his blogs, in his documents. Now, after 3 years, he have issued a new research that is absolutely amazing. So it's an honor to have you here in Milan, because today is a sort of startup of our academy, of FoolFarm Academy. You know that the FoolFarm Academy is probably one of the unique venture builder academy in Italy, and we have launched this year, and it's going to start within 1 month. And today is a sort of a celebration of the start of our courses that is managed by Filippo. So Filippo, welcome on board too. Filippo is the master of the FoolFarm Academy. Please.
Thank you, Andrea. Speaking English in the honor of our guests. So I'll be very brief. This is just a reminder that this event is actually one of a series of educational content offered by our FoolFarm Academy, which is a place for aspiring entrepreneurs, for founders, for research in the field of innovation. And we also offer courses. This is our lead course, a master in venture building. I'll be very quick in what we do. Who are you? Who is it for? If you are an aspiring entrepreneur, if you are a professional that is looking to change his career path, if you're a student coming out of university and trying to go for a non-traditional career, this is a course for you. Why coming with us? Because we're hands-on. This is our list of profiles for teaching. So we have serial startups who lead startups. We have C-level executives who have executive roles. We have CTOs who build the technology of the products we're looking at. We have legal professionals who support the startups. Product designers who make the products, design the products within the startups. So this is our approach, is hands-on, and this is what we're going to teach you. In terms of what you're looking for to come out from our course, you're going to get an introduction to the world of startup 101, an introduction to the world of generative AI and big tech. You're going to meet some founders in person within your course, and then we're going to take you through the whole of what we do practically. So from validation to ideation to MVP building, go-to-market strategy, and finally how to raise funds for your project, for your startup, with supporting investment financing and a final event, which is pitching. How does it work? 12 live sessions. They're in remote, once a week, every Monday, 2 hours in the evening. The class is just 10 people because we want to keep this interactive structure within our courses. How to get in touch with us, how to apply. We're going to start our first course at the beginning of April. www.foolfarm.com/academy, or please scan the QR code in the bottom corner. Thank you very much, and I'll leave you to our guest speaker.
Well, thank you, Filippo. It's time to start, because I know that most of you are, especially people that also are connecting streaming. After Max, we have also other two important guests, Professor Alessio from the University of Sassari and Professor Carlo Bocconi, that also will allow us to enlarge the scenario to come in more details about the phenomenon venture builder startup studio. But now is your turn, Max. So thank you to be here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. Today the topic is venture studio model, and I will cover both problems of venture studios and skepticism about venture studios and some advantages of venture studios. And then we'll suggest what in my opinion what studios should be, how they should be structured in order to succeed. What is a startup studio or a venture studio? Usually it's a team of 10 to 30 professionals. When they start, they can be 5 to 10 people, but then they grow in the number. They partner with entrepreneurs with or without ideas through ideation, validation, creation, and growth stages. They invest capital, and usually they have a broad network of investors to bring capital to startups. And usually they launch on average from 3 to 5 startups a year with involvement of 1 to 2 years per startup. My experience, so my name is Max, I'm a 3x entrepreneur. I never worked anywhere, but when I was 16 I launched my first business. It was reselling electronics on social media. I sold my first company when I was 17. Then I launched 2 more bootstrap profitable companies. One is doing software for video projections, and one is selling online courses. So a bit more than 1 year ago, maybe 1.5 years ago, I started to learn deeply about the venture studio model, because as an entrepreneur I always had a lot of startup and business ideas and I wanted to launch them in parallel. So what I've done, last year I published my 7 months big startup studio research. It attracted a lot of attention from studios around the world. So under the announcement post I got 2,000 comments. Then we had already 5 conferences, 3 were for venture studios, and 1 for VCs and 1 for family offices. Each time about 1,000 registrations and several hundred people online. Then I also record studio podcasts with studio founders. We have a closed community of venture studios, and I was invited to lead an investment syndicate for venture studios. Many people said to me that the paper I published is like the most comprehensive paper on venture studios. This is why I'm speaking today here. And actually it's also available in Italian language. So after this presentation you can outreach to me and I'll send you the link to the Italian version of this paper. The name of the paper is Numbers, Excitement and Criticism of Venture Studios. Once I was on one VC party, VC birthday, and there were a lot of angel investors, VCs, and when one angel investor heard that I'm building something in the venture studio ecosystem, he approached me and asked like, do you know what is the most common phrase of studio founders? Founders of startup studios. I asked, what? And he said, there were $5 million here just a moment ago, where did it go? So like that studios waste a lot of capital and there is no effect of it. I said, okay, and he continues like, to understand what a venture studio is and what it typically does, one should refer to Wikipedia and find an article called Almshouse. And he asked me like, do you know what is an almshouse? I said, no. He said, go to Wikipedia and check what is an almshouse. And I took my phone, opened Wikipedia, and find that an almshouse was charitable housing provided to people during the Middle Ages. They were targeted at the poor of locality, widows, and at elderly people who could no longer pay rent and are generally maintained by charity. So this is this is an example of total criticism of the model. And if you will talk to many VC investors around the world, so you will find that some of them are skeptical and some of them are very optimistic about the model. I will start with skepticism, so you know all the problems with venture studios. So first, it's hard to attract experienced founders. Because studios usually take not 15% equity, not 20%, but usually more than 20%. And for experienced founders who already built companies, sold them, they usually quite easy can raise capital from VC, and they are not ready to partner with the studio to give up equity. So many studios say that the number one problem is getting very experienced founders. But how studios still attract some exit founders? This is an example of one studio which shows that you are getting, so there are 2 ways for entrepreneurs. First is joining a studio, sharing equity with the studio. So in this case, they're showing that the studio takes like 20% equity. Another example is going without a studio. And they're showing that even if the studio takes equity, some number of rounds, in this example very low, like 0.14, are skipped. So like you need less rounds to raise capital. But you have much better chance of success with the startup. And even if you are having less equity, at the same time you can earn more capital. You can earn more when you will exit the company, because the chances of creating a successful company with a studio is more. So this is one example how a studio shows how they attract founders. The second problem is capital requirements, at least 1 to million in the lean approach to launch a studio. On average, $5 to $10 million to launch a studio. There was data by GSSM that a median annual budget for a startup studio is 1.36 million, and the average is 2.5 million. Broken cap table and complexities with future rounds. It is a problem for startups. A broken cap table means that when you go to early stage VC that invest on seed or pre-seed or Series B, Series A, Series B, they will look at the cap table and say, oh, there is a studio which owns majority of equity, so there is little motivation left with entrepreneurs, and they are not ready to invest because the studio owns majority or like big part of equity. And some studios made this as a problem, that they have to lower their equity ownership in the startup to be able for startups to raise more capital on future rounds. But why studios take more equity in comparison with VCs and in comparison with accelerators? Because they're only full-time co-founders. So actually they have a team of 10 to 30 professionals, and they launch, let's say, 4 companies a year. This means that on average, several people full-time are working per each company. And if you look at just VC firms, they usually provide only little network and little support. Accelerators, incubators maybe provide a bit better support, they have some programs, but studios work full-time with you, and this, in this case, they're full-time institutional co-founders. Then there is a problem that it's hard to attract funding to a studio, because for many investors or limited partners, it's a new model and they don't understand. So many investors know how to invest in startups, and there is a lot of ecosystem and examples that what are valuations of startups at each stage, what must be certain KPIs or revenue at each stage in order to get, let's say, Series A funding, Series B around. But with studios, all studios are different. This is why it's very challenging to attract funding to a studio. The difficulty is exponential. One founder of a studio shared with me, so when you are launching a business, so you're becoming an entrepreneur, just a typical business, the chances are that in more cases it will be unprofitable. So you will lose money when launching a business. So it's risky. The startups are even more risky, because usually you come up with a new technology and you have to convince your investors and customers that you are doing something good for them with your new technology, with your new startup. So startups are more unpredictable and more risky than usual businesses. But the startup studio is when you have multiple startups with multiple difficulties, and one studio founder shares that like earlier he was a successful founder and then sold his company and then launched a studio, and he says that in my life now with the studio, every day I have some problems with my startup. So like everything is going wrong somewhere, and it's very stressful to be a founder of a studio. Then the big problem, limited data on the effectiveness of startup studios. So you can find some present data, but all the data which is present has some type of flaws or problems. how it was derived. So either the methodology has a problem or some bias data. So with my team, I'm doing our own research this year to try to get some scientific data on the effectiveness of studios. And it's hard to attract investors for startups, for studios, because like you cannot rely on some very trustworthy data. I will show some data later, but you should know that there should be much better or like much more trustworthy sources of this data to be able to present it to a wide source of a wide range of investors. Not everyone succeeds. If you look at, for example, 400 studios, there is a database called Venture Studio Index database, consisting of 407 studios. And those are studios and some VC firms that incubated companies, but only 1/3 of them are still active after maybe like 10 years or 7 to 10 years of operation. So only 1/3 continues to use this model. And also, I read a book called the Startup Studio Playbook. This book is based on 9 interviews in 2016, 2017. And so by now, since 6-7 years, they have only 3 studios out of 9 are still active and continue to develop new companies. So some of them, maybe 2 of them, have some equity in startups but not operating anymore. 3 are just closed, and like 3 are still active. And one problem, which is quite a good problem, success of a startup can kill a studio. So Max Levchin, he was a founder or co-founder of PayPal. He started his studio, fintech studio called HVF. And then, so they tried to build several companies. One company started to do very well. So this company is called Affirm, a fintech company in the US. And so in 2 years after launching this company, he became a CEO of this company. So he stopped all the activities of other companies and became a CEO, because he says that like there is only one chance you can create, or like not many chances to create a very big company. And he became a CEO, and this company finally made an IPO with valuation probably more than $1.5 billion. And I know other entrepreneurs who started, who launched studio first. They tried about 20 ideas, and then the idea number 20 started to generate revenue very fast, and say like, oh wow, we are stuck on all our 19 attempts, and we are focusing only on one company. So it's also a way and the problem how a studio can be stopped. Okay, so I described 8 problems, and if you look at my research, I will share it later. There are more than, it's actually only one section of my research. I describe it with more figures, numbers, and examples. But do you know how many sections I have in my paper? Maybe someone read it. Do you have any guesses?
16.
Very close. Okay, yeah. Actually, I have this part, so I did this presentation several times. And when I say this, I say, I will show you how many sections I have, so to keep your attention. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So I have 17 sections. And it was only one section, but today in the presentation I will cover only four sections, so I will encourage you to go later to my paper and check it. Yeah, so we are going to advantages of startup studios. So I think Andrea invited me to speak not about the problems, but about advantages. Yeah, so, and the first is The first is speed. So when you have a startup studio, that helps you. First, they provide funding to a startup. Second, they help with connections. For example, I talked to 2 startups here in FoolFarm, and each of them say that like there is a big help in making connections to potential customers. So without a studio, you don't have a brand, so you are unknown entrepreneur. But with a studio, it's much easier to connect to big customers, and it's like it accelerates your sales very much. And I know some studios that build their success only on connections to customers. So they are deep experts in one industry. All their customers know this studio, and for their entrepreneurs, it's much easier to sell. Faster exits. So I used the Venture Studio Index database and compared the time of startups created in studios. So there is a base consisting of 1,800 startups created by venture studios. And where it was possible, I found the time from foundation company until seed round, until Series A, Series B, Series C, and exits, acquisition and IPOs. And found that in comparison with typical startups not created in studios, startups created in studios get funding on average from 41 to 51% faster, and they exit from 31 to 33% faster. So some studio founders compare the startup studio as to a factory of startups. So actually, before the first factory was invented and built, there was only manual labor. So all the clothes were created just by people, and then when there is the first factory was launched, it's much more effective to have a conveyor when all your processes are automated than when you are doing it manually. Then accumulation of industry experience and expertise. So there is one studio called OSS Ventures in Paris. They create B2B SaaS companies for manufacturing. So they visit factories and they just learn from them like what are the problems with these factories, and they build software in order to help those factories to be more effective. So their team visited 860 times different factories during 4 years, and they collected hundreds of pain points of those factories. They launched 20 companies, 8 of them got Series A funding during this period. And what's interesting that no one VC firm, no one VC fund, no one entrepreneur can say that I understand how to build software for factories better than this startup studio focusing on it, because they're a team of 20 people, visited factories more than 800 times, and it's quite difficult to get this expertise if you're just independent. So if you are building your 10th startup in agriculture, it's much easier than you're launching the first startup. So this is why more experience you have in a specific industry, the better your results are. Savings and sharing of the studio team. So a startup doesn't have to hire some external digital agency or hire some full-time people when they don't need full-time people. So they have a studio team, and they can use their resources to get any necessary service or jobs, any necessary jobs to be done with the studio team. So you actually have it at cost and not overpaying to external digital agencies or some development agencies. Investment efficiency. So there are only 2, I would say, papers that describe investment efficiency. They are too optimistic, and if you talk to some venture fund managers, they will say, oh no, it's impossible. So one paper created by GSSN, Global Startup Studio Network, is they conducted a survey amongst about 250 startups created in studios worldwide, and they found that like there is IRR, internal rate of return, of 53% at a specific period of time, while on average for usual startups it's 21%. Another paper, probably more trustworthy, shows that 13% of studios that answered to the survey, they generated 60% of IRR return for investors, in comparison with top quartile or top 25% of VC funds with 30%. So those numbers are very optimistic, but still there are many studio founders I know that report very high IRR. So for example, one VC fund, venture studio founder, she shared with me that I was at one panel of VC investors and I felt like a black sheep because I shared our 80% IRR with for our 5 years. So they launched like 10 companies, 5 were acquired, and they had very big returns. And all like VCs looked at her and like, is it real? Are you kidding or not? And so I think that on average it's less. So this number is very optimistic, and I think that if you look at all the studios, it's less. But still, there are some very exceptional studios on the market that show very good results, and we are trying to find the right, the trustworthy number this year with our research. Reduce risks. Usually, studios have some step-by-step process of investing in startups. So they are not putting 500K at one tranche, but they can distribute it for maybe 3 steps of, let's say, 50K, then 150K, and then 300K. In order to, if some idea doesn't work, so you don't have to continue and to invest a lot of capital, you can just choose another idea, and usually studios have the pipeline of, or like, backlog of maybe 200 ideas, 500 ideas, so they just choose next one, and it's easier for studios to pivot cold-bloodedly, so meaning that to change their main idea to another industry. So in this term, you have reduced risks because you are not launching only one startup and you are betting all the capital on this one startup, but you have different startups, and of course some will die, but some will become very successful. So you are de-risking your investments if you are launching a studio in comparison with investing capital in your own one company or in one company. And entrepreneurs can dedicate more time to core business tasks. Studio takes all unnecessary things which bother an entrepreneur from building the product and talking to customers and selling. This is why most studios, they generate revenue faster than independent startups in wild. And this, some studio founders say even that a studio allows to entrepreneurs to be very focused on their core business tasks. For example, they cannot focus on building infrastructure for their startup. They cannot focus on fundraising. They can only focus on talking to customers and building the products and selling them. Networking opportunities comparable to accelerators and VC funds. Usually, venture studios are launched by very experienced founders, and those who have broad VC network. This allows for startups to get revenue faster and to fundraise also faster. And psychological compatibility, parallel entrepreneurship instead of serial. So I personally started be very interested in the model because I've always had many startup and business ideas, and I tried to figure out what is the best way to launch companies in parallel. For example, you know, Steve Jobs was a serial entrepreneur, so he was almost all his time on Apple and very focused. Elon Musk is an example of parallel entrepreneur. He launches several companies simultaneously, and all of them are quite very big and successful. And some entrepreneurs are more inclined to have many ideas and want to pursue them simultaneously. And for them, the launching of a startup studio is a good way to do many ideas at the same time. Yeah, so this is the reason for studios to be launched. Then you can ask me like, okay, what must be the great studio and how to launch a studio that will succeed? My vision. So here was a phrase earlier. It's called, let's use some ninja techniques to build a great startup studio. Keeping your attention. What will I do next? It's a fun fact about me that 15 years ago I learned some Japanese martial arts. But then last September when I published this paper on venture studios, I started to have many online calls with many studio founders, and so I tried to figure out what is the best way to be memorable in long term, and I brought this rare skill to my online call. So actually, I'm not doing it only in person as now, but on every online call, maybe I had like 300 online calls during the last month. When people ask me, how are you? I took it and show some rare skill, ninja techniques on how to build a great studio. So the question is like, what is the key factor to define the studio's success? If you have some answers in your mind, I encourage you to share. Like, what do you think is one of the most important thing to solve? Maybe if you have some guesses, it would be great.
Founders.
Yeah, right. So the right idea is to have great founders. For more studios. So I know some studios that say you don't have to attract great founders to a studio. You can work with even students or just with entrepreneurs or skilled people, but not super great founders that chase unicorns and plan to build a $1 billion company. So, but for most studios, they say that the biggest problem is to attract great founders, and even well-known great studios, if you ask like, what is your main focus as a studio, they say we are trying to make the best possible terms for founders. We are trying to build a big funnel of founders. So some studios, for example, the studio I mentioned, which builds software for factories, they attract 8,000 applications from founders a year, and they choose only 40 best ones to partner with, and by the end of the year they have only 10 entrepreneurs with whom they launch 5 companies, so 2 co-founders for each company. So why for many studios attracting best founders is is a good strategy. Many VC funds also, they are easily finding serial entrepreneurs because there is statistics that shows that company success by founder experience. So here you have entrepreneur who has not launched companies previously. So only 0 companies, so it's his first company. And the probability of exit is about 5%. So, but if a founder launched previously 3 companies or 4 companies or more, the probability of exit, of acquisition of a company or an IPO is already more than 10%. So this means, yeah.
I wish something.
Yeah.
I want something.
What?
No, I was right about the founders. The key factor.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, the more experienced founders, the better chances of succeed. This is why studios and VC funds are chasing those experienced entrepreneurs. What's interesting that studios themselves are such entrepreneurs with their co-founders with previous experience of founding companies. So some experienced studios, they launch, let's say, 15, 20 companies in several years, Very experienced companies like those who are working for 10 years, they might launch 30 companies, 40 companies, 50 companies during this period. And of course, when you launched 10 companies, it's much easier to launch 11s in comparison if you are launching only the first. So you continue to think like, what must be the conditions to make it unreasonable for top-tier founders launch a startup without a studio? When great founders are evaluating their chances, they think, okay, I can raise capital from a VC fund and launch a startup, or I can join a studio in a specific industry which already launched a lot of companies in this field, and for me it's more efficiently to save my time and money and to launch a company together with a studio. And there are several ideas I want to share. First, the studio must have a niche focus or a vertical focus, and in 3 years, each studio that are being launched should say, we are the best at building such startups in this industry, in this geography. So if you can say this, it will mean that for entrepreneurs it will be more attractive to join you, because you will save time and money for entrepreneurs to launch a company. Then, ideally, if your team of a studio consists of experts in the field you are building startups. So you have a niche team, and there was a study which showed that if you, as a founder, have more than 3 years of experience in a specific niche or vertical, so you are more likely to create very successful high growth, 0.5 high growth startup. Then if you are just, you are choosing like new vertical for you. So the same, like if I'll ask you to and say like, can you do those nunchaku things? If you have 0 hours of experience, you will not be able to do it. But if you have 50 hours, it's much easier. So niche team with experience in the vertical where you build it. Then focus on creating lean startups. So launch as fast as possible. Have revenue as fast as possible. And also like have profitability or positive unit economics, so that LTV to CAC is at least 3 or more years. And here is a picture showing that earlier, maybe like 10 years ago, only 32% in 2014, only 32% of startups during seed round had revenue. But 2 years ago, it was like 73% revenue. If you deduct Web3 startups here, you will have 76% of revenue. So this means that investors like when startups generate revenue, and if you can, as a startup studio, help your startups generate revenue faster. And in case, for example, I mentioned already the studio creating B2B SaaS for factories, they generate revenue in first revenue of let's say 100K of maybe first or 2 or 3 contracts with factories. They sell only in 4 or 5 months, but general startups in the same field and general studios, they generated like only in 9 months. So if you can do your revenue in startups faster, this will bring more chances to succeed for your startups.
Max, sorry.
Yeah.
Very slide. So in this picture, you think this explains the startup studio effect on the...
This is showing just that fundraising rounds get such startups that generate revenue. So it's percentage of companies generating revenue. And like earlier, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, not so many startups had revenue when they fundraise. So
what do you think about the reason of this curve? Why this is the curve increase?
Decrease here?
No, increase in the last year.
Increase?
Yes.
Because investors like when it's not a bubble or it's not an abstract idea, but when customers pay money for the project. And live studio, meaning that you can use geographic arbitrage, meaning that you can hire people remotely, whereas living costs are less. Then using AI tools. So I have to delete this point because it's already very common for many startups. So AI helps to reduce costs and improve studio playbooks. Studio playbooks is a document on how we launch a startup, so how we launch a startup successfully. And the stage gate model, but not for startups, but for studios themselves. Stage gate model means that studios implement a stage gate model for their startups. It's when I explain that they distribute this 500K check into 3 stages, as an example. But studios themselves can be built in the effective way when, like, they don't need 10 million capital to start. They may need only 1 to 2 million for the first 2 years. And when they prove that they can build viable startups that get external capital, only then they can raise the sidecar fund to invest in their startups. And here, it's a picture showing how the studios are growing in the number. Actually, I think that today there is much more than 1,000 studios worldwide, because not of them are on some maps or in some databases. But during the last 5 years, the number of studios doubled. Still, I believe that it's still in the earliest technology adoption life cycle. So if you know this approach, there are 5 stages: innovators, early adopters, early majority, then how is it called? Last majority, and then laggards, probably. So, and I still believe that it is starting to be standardized, and if there would be some standards for studios, we will see several thousand studios worldwide. This is why it's a great opportunity for investors and founders join this trend. So I know some people who say that, for example, there was a boom of syndicates on Angel List when Angel List started in 2008, 2009, and there was a boom of investment syndicates. So angel investors started to grow in number worldwide, and now it's like something usual and typical: angel investors and syndicates for angel investors. But the venture studio model is doing the same. So now it's a big interest. And so I published this paper on venture studios. It attracted hundreds of studios worldwide. And I see, actually, I grew my network. Like 1 year ago, I wasn't so active on LinkedIn. I had maybe like 500 connections. Now I have more than 10,000 connections and followers just because I published a paper, held some conferences, and a lot of people are interested in the venture studio ecosystem.
Can I ask a question? Is that okay?
Yeah.
On the point you were making earlier about the fact of attracting talent, wouldn't there be an argument that the studio has actually the opposite effect of allowing you to be successful even without needing to attract the star founder, because the studio founder can help, and so getting good managers could be good enough versus a startup that's an incubator where you need to have an exceptional founder to be successful?
Yes, it's a good argument. Recently, I published an interview with a founder who launched with his studio more than 100 deep tech startups. And his approach is that, like, you don't have to chase best entrepreneurs. Let them just raise venture capital. Focus on just skilled people, skilled professionals, maybe even first-time founders, but those who have some like marketing skills, development skills. Focus on them at the same time, like build all the infrastructure in order to help them to grow their startup. So there is another approach, but from the perspective of a startup studio, still, and in his approach, the studio owns majority, so like 90% or like 100%. So he says that as a studio, you can launch startups partnering with entrepreneurs and residents who join the studio, who have maybe some small equity in the studio itself. but not in a specific startup. And in his model, he says that one entrepreneur in residence can manage as a CEO of 3 to 5 startups. So he has completely like different approach. But more from the perspective of studios, the better talent you can attract to you, the better results. So this is why still, even if a studio helps to launch new companies efficiently, it's still for the studio better to partner with better entrepreneurs. This is why all of them are trying to create the best possible terms for entrepreneurs. And last slide here, I'm showing the model to launch a studio. So for those entrepreneurs or investors considering investing or launching a studio, there are several steps to launching. The first is just 3 months MVP when studio founders try to understand whether they can attract at the same time investors and founders and key stakeholders, maybe some experts and advisors, to launch a studio. So if you are able to solve this chicken and egg problem, or the cold start problem, you can then raise some capital, $1 to $2 million in order to, for 2 years, to cover some small team, maybe about 10 people of a studio. And even don't invest in startups with cash, but only have a team which will help to launch 2 to 4 startups a year. At the second stage, you are attracting external capital, pre-seed and seed capital from angel investors, early stage VCs. If you can show that with this small capital, you are able to build several successful startups that raised pre-seed or seed funding, then you are raising your fund for maybe like 10 to 25 million, maybe even like $5 million fund for the next 4 years. You are launching so-called dual entity model when you have a holding company of a studio and you have a sidecar fund which invests in your startups on pre-seed. And then during the next 4 years, your goal is to exit one of your startups in order to show to your investors that, yeah, I can not only build startups that get funding, but I can also exit those startups. And this is a way for studio to become independent, and then they continue to launch their fund number 2, fund number 3, and growing into a big studio. So some studios today, they have a fund of 300 million as their fund number 4. Because they showed that like they are a very experienced team which can build successful companies and exit them. Yeah, and here I'm showing the last slide. I can send you this presentation. I can send you the link to my 7-month studio research in Italian, in English, and I can share you some additional top 20 resources of 2023 about venture studios, so that you can go deep into this. So you can use a QR code, you can find me on LinkedIn, send me a connection request, say that you visited the FoolFarm today's event, and I will send you all the resources.
I think you need for Max. And if there are some questions, we have 10 minutes of Q&A. So if you have some question for Max, is an exceptional opportunities for answer or for some topics that you have to discuss. Mark.
Yeah, I have a question. Thanks, Max. I mean, this is definitely a very insightful and enriching research in startup studios. Do you find any difference in patterns in terms of exit value, time to exit, and success rate between startup studios in the US market versus the European market? Because you showed like average numbers, but is there a difference? Is there a pattern?
Between time to fundraise and time to exit, I don't know the differences. I know that on average, studios launching in the US, they're more likely to raise a sidecar fund from scratch. So some exit founders who built, let's say, 100 million company with revenue 100 million, or exit company which was valued at 100 million plus or 1 billion, So they just from scratch raise a 10, 15, 20 or 30 million fund, and it's easier for them because a lot of capital is in the US. But in terms of differences, I think that those models I presented is more for European models that you have to show to your investors that you create companies that raise external capital and only then raise a fund. While in the US, if you are a very experienced VC or an entrepreneur, you are more likely to raise 20 million just from scratch.
Cool.
Yeah, but it's more expensive to build companies in the US. And when I talk to some US studios, I suggest this idea that you can mix your team with some remote people somewhere in Latin America or Europe or Asia, Africa. That is like you can just save a lot of costs for your back office team because the difference in salaries might be several times.
I have another edge case question. Have you seen models where the studio, instead of acting as a VC, where the startup raised from external investors, raises money at studio level and thus potentially attracts different LPs, right? So not a normal VC, but people that don't look for the exit economics or for the return to happen, but more to build a holding company in terms of.
So you mean that studio which is not relying on external funding, but only uses their own capital to build companies and invest in them, right?
Yeah, and not necessarily relying on exits, right? And working on the cash flow of the company that it creates.
So I saw many approaches, including those who invest very little capital. So, for example, I know one entrepreneur. It's even maybe not can be called a studio because it's a one-person entrepreneur investing 50K per startup, taking 33% of equity and launching companies. And he was very successful with this model. So in 2 years, he reached a revenue of 10 million of his portfolio and 2 million profits of this portfolio. Invested only 500K initially. But entrepreneurs, so there are some studios that try to do it, but it's more I think they are not, they're doing it privately, or I mean that they're not playing this game of building a company for sale and to for chasing a unicorn like a venture capital. Maybe these are just bootstraps. So we discussed with some studio experts that maybe this model should be called a cash flow studio or a cash cow studio. And I think that there is still approach to do such companies, and some studios they're not relying on fast exits. I believe that if you are a vertical focused studio, it's not a good way to sell companies as fast as possible, because some studios they say, so the only first offer we get for our company, we are planning to sell it because they need cash flow for their studio, and their model is to build companies and sell companies. It's one model. Another model might be you are building profitable companies, but maybe they are not so venture scalable, meaning that it's not likely that you will have some 50 million exit or 200 million exit. So it's just a different model, and yes, I think that you have to do different pitch for your investors if you are raising capital for such a model of profitable. I'm personally more inclined to build such profitable companies because I have experience of bootstrap companies. This is why I think that you need only a little capital to start generating revenue, and only then you can scale your business.
I have a question. So on your slide in venture studios, there were some venture studios who work with corporates, so there are corporate venture builders, corporate venture studios, and venture studios that are independent. Did you notice in your research a particular key difference between those that are corporate-led and those that are independent?
So independent are more true studios, true in terms of that they are not dependent on some fees from corporations. They're not dependent on big capital from corporations, and they build in for the market. And in this term, I just saw that some entrepreneurs are more inclined to build like independent studios, while some of them are like, okay, we'll better use less riskiest approach to do a corporate studio. And there are also different types of corporate venture studios. So some of them, like a corporation, launches their own studio, partnering with entrepreneurs. So it's one approach, studio for corporation. Another approach is when it's an independent venture builder or a venture studio partnering for each of their startups with some corporations, so using their capital to co-found and do joint ventures together. And the third model is when a company is partnering with corporations to launch a venture builder for them. So, for example, they say, okay, you're putting $10 million to launch this studio. We'll use those 10 millions to build 10 companies, and we'll use part of your 10 millions to cover our team expenses of our studio, let's say 10 people. And in return, we'll get some equity, let's say 20% of equity the studio gets. So for the studio, it's not riskiest approach to launch a to create equity, because all the team of all the expenses for the team are covered by the corporation, and they're just getting free equity in each startup. So, but I don't know I cannot say that it's better to launch a corporate studio or it's better to launch independent studio. So there are just a bit different models, business models in terms of equity investments, stakeholders. Corporate studios are more likely to have some conflicts of interest and a bit maybe less experienced founders, because maybe not less experienced founders, but more corporation mindset people who worked for corporations for 20 years, were CEOs somewhere, and they're ready to have small equity in the startup. So there are different models, but I cannot say what is better.
Thank you.
Maybe you'll have someone corporate venture builder conference.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question on the effectiveness of studio. You said that a problem of them is the lack of data about the effectiveness of studio.
Yes.
But is there any industry where data shows that studios are more effective, or it's like more general?
Yeah, so I saw a lot of studios that are effective in building companies and much more effective than just independent entrepreneurs. For example, so I gave this example with a studio producing B2B SaaS for manufacturing software startups. So they have very great traction. Another example is Flagship Pioneering, a biotech studio. They had 7 IPOs. So it is very deep tech companies, and they had so it's very high percentage of IPOs. Of I don't know how many companies they launched, but 7 IPOs is very big achievement. So I don't know any entrepreneur who created such number of IPO companies. Then there is a studio called eFounders, and then they have a holding company, Hexa, in France. So they launched 40 companies, and 3 reached the status of unicorn, $1 billion valuation. So if you compare 3 companies out of 40, so it's something like 7.5% chance to create a unicorn company. If you consider this opportunity to a typical VC or a typical startups, so it's much less opportunity. So for entrepreneurs who are partnering with the studio who create successful big companies, or you having chances to succeed like 10 more chances to create a big company. So these are just several examples, but there are a lot of them. So I think dozens of examples are very successful studios that build companies, exit them for dozens of $1 million, hundreds of $1 million, or even more than $1 billion. The biggest example, is a company Snowflake, which was incubated by Sutter Hill Ventures, and at IPO they had more than $50 billion valuation of a company. Yeah, so there are a lot of successful examples, but we don't have some detailed data on like these are industries. This we compared without any biases and without any problems in the methodology and get some free, transparent data on studios. So this is a problem.
Maybe it's too early.
Yeah, and the data is very closed. So we are doing our attempt this year. We actually attract some contributors and sponsors to this research. And so we are trying to get as much data as possible, and we have some thesis on how to make scientific unbiased research on studios, get some new ideas on like what studios are more successful, are less successful, and how they can be compared to accelerators and VC firms and independent startups. Okay.
Talking about success rate, I think everyone can agree on the fact that serial entrepreneur has more chance to succeed. But what about venture studio? I know some venture studio that are founded by not serial entrepreneur, not even entrepreneur. Do you find the same in your research? And what about the track record of venture studio?
Yeah, I believe I believe that each studio should be launched by ideally exit founders who put their own capital to start and who ideally had 10 years of experience in the vertical or in the industry they are planning to build company. So this will attract better entrepreneurs because good entrepreneurs want to partner with super great entrepreneurs. So this is why I recommend to studio founders that when they decide to launch a studio, they make sure that they have on their team some great entrepreneurs with previous exits that can be like a trust sign for future entrepreneurs that like we have a great team with big exits, and most successful studios that are today, they were launched by some serial entrepreneurs or exit entrepreneurs. But still there are
growing, so I think that when the numbers growing can be that some
yeah, I meet a lot of studio. Yeah, I meet a lot of
even never.
yeah, I meet a lot of studios that are launched not by exit entrepreneurs or not by super successful entrepreneur, and I just understand that their success rate will be lower. I think much lower than by exit entrepreneur, because first of all, fundraising for a studio is challenging. If you are not putting your own capital to start, it will be harder to convince other investors. If you didn't raise a lot of capital earlier, it will be hard to fundraise a lot of capital to your studio. And if you didn't sell your company, so it's also, it's just from many perspectives, it's much easier to launch a successful studio being a serial entrepreneur. So it doesn't matter that there cannot be successful cases without, but if you want to make a bet on which studio will succeed, better to make a bet on the studio which has a very professional team with previous exits in the founding team. But no statistics on like what is the success rate of such studios and such studios.
My final question, I have read your research, and in the final part you say that what's your real opinion or what's your favorite model? What do you plan to create a startup studio, more specialized, more smaller? So you can explain the last part of your research. It's quite interesting to understand your perspective about that.
Yeah, actually I showed here that like niche studios, meaning that in a vertical, where they are number one experts, and it's very difficult to build startups without this expertise. With niche team, meaning that the founding team and the team of the studio has experience in what they are building. Then creating startups that are focused at generating revenue as fast as possible, because it will be opening a lot of opportunities for fundraising, for easier fundraising in future. And being a lean studio, meaning that not wasting a lot of capital, being effective in how you make operations. So this is, I call it niche, lean approach. Yeah. But in simple, vertical focus studios will be more successful. And I saw, so Alper Selen, the founder of Enhanced Ventures, so he, with his team, made some research on that vertical focus studios, or focus studios, they raise capital, they raise 2/3 of all the capital, but there only like 1/3 of studios are focused, meaning that have focus on one or two sectors. And then, so I proposed this idea in my paper, and then I saw that other studio influencers, they also say that the future of studios is being a vertical studio. And like, in order to succeed, you have to be specialist, not agnostic studio, building completely different startups.
Great. There's another question or no? Okay. Thank you very much. Now, please. Well, I continue in English, but shortly we change in Italian. Now it's time to meet a special person and to meet Professor Alessio Tola of the University of Sassari. You know that as a FoolFarm we have recently established a venture builder in the University of Sassari as part of our program named the Forest Village. Forest Village is part of our sourcing. You know, the FoolFarm is a specialized venture builder. We have two sources. One is our R&D. The second part are universities. We come in, especially universities in the south, or in place in which we can provide our support to support students to transform their thesis, especially in our environment. You know that we work in the environment of artificial intelligence or deep tech, to support the guys to transform their thesis in their next job. So I invited Alessio to explain his opinion and his view as being the delegate of innovation of the University of Sassari regarding this process, regarding this model, how it can be useful to impact for example, in North Sardinia. So please, Alessio, welcome on board.
Io riprendo in lingua italiana. Buonasera a tutti e grazie a FoolFarm, grazie a Cinelli e a tutto il suo team per l'invito, grazie a voi che siete presenti naturalmente. E vedete, ascoltare la ricerca i risultati della ricerca di Max è non solo interessante ma è anche affascinante, perché la ricerca è stata strutturata con una indagine molto precisa, utilizzando i parametri veri, quelli che consentono di effettuare le valutazioni sulle start-up e sulla crescita che queste fanno, in maniera molto precisa, e ne avevamo assoluta necessità. Perché ne avevamo necessità? Perché vedete, ora, giustamente l'assetto di dati da parte di chi vuole iniziare a fare impresa attraverso una startup è fondamentale. L'assetto di dati di chi vuole giustamente approfondire il tema del mercato è altrettanto importante, ma è fondamentale per noi che all'interno delle università, e sono già svariate in Italia, oltre che nel mondo, stiamo sposando l'idea di lavorare insieme ai venture builder per la costruzione di percorsi virtuosi per la crescita e per il supporto non alle start-up ma alle idee, per il supporto a quelle persone che in un ambiente ideale per la crescita, per lo sviluppo, per la nascita delle idee, cioè le università degli studi, ebbene, abbiano voglia di intraprendere questo percorso. Le università in Italia non erano minimamente preparate. Non è scandaloso fare questa affermazione. Evidentemente io taglio la coda, la parte alta, la parte diciamo più evoluta di quelle università che sono state in grado di avviare dei percorsi estremamente virtuosi nel tempo, che non si sono fermate ad avere incubatori, acceleratori, spesso in raccordo con i centri di ricerca regionali, a volte supportati da centri di ricerca nazionali. Però, vedete, tutte queste attività erano straordinariamente legate ad una funzione, diciamo, straordinariamente tipica, caratteristica dell'università, che fondamentalmente era quella di fare ricerca, di fare didattica, e soltanto negli ultimi anni un po' si è aperta ad una terza missione che poi è straordinariamente complessa da attuare, perché per l'università cercare di generare dei servizi per il territorio, cioè cercare di generare dei raccordi, cercare di generare dello sviluppo non è un'operazione semplice, non lo è in nessuna università, per delle ragioni molto molto semplici. Prima perché culturalmente, tradizionalmente, diciamo, gli atenei sono vocati a delle funzioni che ciascuno dei soggetti che vi sia approcciato per lavorarci dentro, cioè i docenti del corpo amministrativo, ebbene, vedevano come di natura esclusiva, cioè fare la didattica, il supporto alla didattica, la ricerca e il supporto alla ricerca. Ebbene, gli atenei oggi si aprono a un mondo, diciamo, di collaborazione, di cooperazione, di supporto, di crescita, di sviluppo, per fare molto più che un trade union, che è un termine decisamente obsoleto, ma si pongono come un soggetto che non esercita più sostanzialmente una funzione di presidio attraverso la strutturazione di un incubatore, attraverso la strutturazione di una struttura anche fisica che in qualche modo favorisce, diciamo, la nascita di soggetti imprenditoriali. No. Ora la scommessa è più alta, perché siamo fuori tempo massimo. La scommessa è quella di cercare di lavorare insieme a quei soggetti, a quegli imprenditori, a quei gruppi di imprenditori che hanno voglia di investire nella crescita delle idee, nella generazione di nuove attività di impresa, e quindi di supportare questi percorsi imprenditoriali, che non sono poi dei percorsi imprenditoriali di natura tradizionale, sono dei percorsi imprenditoriali che sono legati in maniera specifica ad attività di gestione economico-finanziaria molto molto precise, con delle regole altrettanto chiare. Dico anche la verità, difficilmente, per la loro stessa complessità, raccontabili a gruppi imprenditoriali di natura tradizionale. E questo è un altro grande limite su cui noi ci troviamo a doverci raccontare le opportunità e i limiti. Parlare di start-up e parlare di crescita di start-up significa avere delle profonde conoscenze del sistema finanziario. Parlare di start-up e di crescita delle start-up significa sicuramente adoperare i linguaggi adeguati, ma non solo, significa anche avere un certo acume nella comprensione dell'oggetto, dell'attività specifica che quella start-up vuole, intende portare avanti, perché è proprio nelle sfumature della stessa che spesso risiede la potenzialità di successo o fatalmente la deriva di insuccesso. Ora, per noi che ci occupiamo di questa materia da tanti anni, ebbene, ci siamo resi conto che seminare questo genere di attività formativa, aprirci alle academy come quella che sta generando FoolFarm, è un po' l'unica via. Abbiamo da seminare tanto, perché abbiamo raccolto tante buone idee, tante buone intenzioni, e la mia grande paura, ve lo dico da soggetto che fatalmente ha dovuto fare questo lavoro all'interno dell'Ateneo da tanti anni, è appunto la capacità di guidare la buona intenzione, la capacità di poter discernere da una buona idea che può diventare startup ad un'idea che probabilmente una startup non lo diventerà mai. Capite che c'è anche un grande senso di responsabilità in questo genere di racconto che si sta facendo, anche perché ergersi a soggetto giudicante o a soggetto che vuole ergere una barriera rispetto a un'attività, vedete, è una cosa importante. Questa attività va fatta con il dovuto senso della opportunità. Non è semplice, perché poi anche, vedete, sentire e vedere i giovani che credono in qualcosa, detto in maniera molto banale, però anche provare a raccontargli che quella cosa non è, diciamo, supportabile in un certo percorso, ma perché lo stesso mercato non è nelle condizioni di supportarlo, non è un'operazione delle più semplici. Quindi occuparsi di startup oggi attraverso il mondo accademico, quale responsabilità per il corpo docente, per l'Ateneo tutto che vuole cimentarsi nell'offrire un percorso e un supporto ai propri studenti, ai propri giovani ricercatori, a chi in qualche modo all'interno di questo straordinario luogo nel quale le idee dovrebbero in qualche modo maturare, dovrebbero prolificare, dovrebbero confrontarsi, dovrebbero avere un po' il senso di una crescita razionale, ecco, proprio perché ci troviamo in un luogo di studio, è sicuramente una via, ma è una via estremamente complessa. È complessa per la stessa evoluzione del momento imprenditoriale. Far finta che la crescita percorra una rapidità di curva di 10 anni fa o di 20 anni fa è una follia, perché basta vedere semplicemente i dati così come emergono negli ultimi periodi per capire che l'evoluzione ha assunto delle accelerazioni in alcuni momenti anche improvvise, poi naturalmente subisce degli effetti che sono quelli tipici dei mercati, delle operazioni congiunturali, di ciò che ripara l'economia, va bene, però certamente occorre essere preparati. E la nostra grande paura è appunto quella di attivare noi dei percorsi che possano preparare i soggetti in grado di affiancare lo sviluppo di queste nuove iniziative. Ecco, come farlo? Certamente occorre dotarsi di strumenti, occorre dotarsi di un programma, occorre dotarsi, come in qualunque attività, di obiettivi da quantomeno provare a rispettare. Certamente occorre dotarsi di schemi operativi che siano quelli, diciamo, del mondo, del mercato al quale facciamo riferimento. Certamente non possiamo esulare da tutto quanto in un certo qual modo è ciò che ci viene insegnato dai mercati internazionali, perché poi la competitività di questi soggetti è certamente di natura internazionale e non può essere limitata esclusivamente alla buona volontà dell'italiano. Ora, potremmo naturalmente continuare a dibattere questa cosa. Io vi metto a disposizione se ci sono eventuali domande. Io rappresento un po' l'esperienza dell'Università di Sassari, che ha sposato l'iniziativa di creazione di un Fuller Village. Ci troviamo proprio alla vigilia del Prof di progetto che accadrà questo lunedì appunto a Sassari, e abbiamo cercato proprio nel nostro piccolo di coinvolgere tutti gli stakeholders, ma tutti gli stakeholders, quelli veri, non quelli che devono chiaramente appiccicare un cartellino in una sede, in una nuova sede aziendale o in una nuova sede di ricerca, no? Perché essere uno stakeholder ha dei significati precisi, importanti. Anche qui non possiamo, come dire, pensare che ciascun soggetto che può essere interessato, pur esercitando semplicemente una funzione di presidio, diventa un partner. Non è così. Essere partner ha un significato preciso, puntuale, responsabile, anche in termini economico-finanziari. Non è un'operazione che può diciamo, eludere il meccanismo di mercato. Se sei dentro il mercato ci sei con le regole del mercato, con i denari da inserire, con le risorse da investire e quanto altro utile affinché poi il rischio imprenditoriale possa remunerare i fattori della produzione che hai inserito in quel contesto. Ecco, quindi vi dicevo, fortemente consapevoli per aver studiato, perché poi alla fine il percorso è sempre quello, cercare di capire, di studiare, di vedere e di maturare le competenze. Anche in questo percorso la mia università, il mio rettore che tanto ha creduto in questa cosa e che mi ha delegato per portarla avanti, diciamo, rappresenta uno degli spazi ideali nell'ambito del quale si sta provando a fare, a rafforzare questa sorta di imprenditoria italiana, cercando un po' anche di dare uno spazio per una competitività dei percorsi, come dicevo prima, a livello internazionale, per uscire un po' anche da quel contesto, come dire, locale che malamente diventa globale, ecco, partendo proprio, diciamo, con il piede giusto per stare nel contesto un po' che ci vede parlare a pari titolo con i luoghi dove tradizionalmente queste attività si svolgono in maniera profittevole.
Alessio, ti faccio una domanda. Come l'hai risposto prima, l'hai detto prima, come mai secondo te invece di viceversa, nonostante forti investimenti, perché sono stati investiti molti capitali anche pubblici in incubatori, acceleratori, contamination lab, di tutto e di più, noi ne vediamo di tutti i tipi girando l'Italia nell'università, però poi alla fine le start-up che nascono dal percorso universitario, non so se tutti lo sapete, non sono neanche l'1% degli studenti laureati nei 3 anni, sono pochissimi. Se lo confrontiamo col modello americano, nel quale stiamo parlando del 19%, o anche tedesco il 9%, inglese 11%, è completamente differente il nostro approccio. Come mai secondo te questo modello di investimento nella trasformazione del percorso di studi verso l'imprenditoria, che dovrebbe essere stato agevolato da tutti questi investimenti, non è funzionato e non sta funzionando?
Ci sono tante ragioni, devo dirvi la verità. Io non come Max, ma provengo da un periodo abbastanza lungo di studio degli incubatori. Sono stato un po' ovunque dagli Stati Uniti, ma anche ho visitato soprattutto quelli del New Jersey che si occupano soprattutto di incubare imprese che svolgono attività nel settore agroalimentare, un po' perché mi interessava, d'accordo, questo raffronto con gli incubatori che un po' si occupavano in Sardegna, va bene? Che oltre all'ICT tradizionalmente nell'area di Cagliari si occupavano un po' di tante cose. I motivi, le ragioni, Andrea, sono tante. In realtà è difficilissimo trovare la maggior causa efficiente del disastro, perché secondo me di disastro si tratta. Vi dico quello che un po' mi aveva detto il direttore dell'incubatore dell'Università di New Jersey, dove i numeri sono decisamente superiori a quelli italiani comunque, mentre gli faceva vedere questa cosa, molto molto ampia, un bellissimo incubatore in un campus straordinario, dotato di ogni comfort. Ma guardate, mi diceva, vedi questi ragazzi, sono tutti convinti che stare in giro con il bermuda, la maglietta, l'infradito e la tazza di tè porti a fare gli innovatori. Una reazione così tanto cruda da un direttore, devo dire la verità, non me l'aspettavo, ma in primis perché non lo conoscevo, prima cosa, perché comunque parlava della sua struttura, e invece come tipico degli americani non si è sottratto dal giudizio tranchant, anche se la locuzione è francese, d'accordo, su quello che gli accadeva dentro, ed era mortalmente infastidito da questa cosa. Veramente. E mi parlava dei loro parametri, noi li ospitiamo qui 2 anni a determinati costi, ecco, questi qua utilizzano questo tempo, al che ho fatto la domanda, quanti di questi poi mediamente vanno fuori? Beh, effettivamente le percentuali corrispondono più o meno con quanto diceva Andrea. dare la colpa a chi vuole fare impresa. Vedete, fare impresa è un'operazione di una complessità disarmante. Allora, il primo errore è che si dice che imprenditore ci nasci confondendo una cosa, cioè l'istinto di voler essere autonomo, fare impresa, mettersi sul mercato in autonomia, probabilmente è una cosa che un po' uno ce l'ha o non ce l'ha, e fino qui ci siamo. Ho capito ragazzi, ma quanta tecnica c'è? Quanta competenza ci vuole per gestire l'impresa? Anche su un'impresa che probabilmente è orientata alla produzione in un certo modo, ma è molto più orientata al mercato finanziario, come può essere una startup, comunque c'è da fare un ragionamento molto molto importante. L'impresa è comunque riempire dei bicchieri allo stesso punto tutti i giorni. E questa cosa un po' è noiosa, è faticosa, cozza male con l'avvento dell'idea del tempo da investire nel lavoro che hanno le nuove generazioni, insomma si sposa sociologicamente male, d'accordo, con il modello. E invece, diciamo, certi comportamenti un po' più soft, un po' più, come dire, da soggetti che ricoprono una funzione di presidio che quindi non è aggressiva sul mercato, ecco, certi tipi di comportamenti vengono un po' sposati meglio, ecco, da parte di chi vuole fare impresa, cioè stare in una comfort zone, no? Nella quale comunque ci si aspetta che accada qualcosa, che il mercato riconosca qualcosa, forse è più semplice come idea generale. Ecco, questa è un'altra delle variabili che io ho osservato, però ne metto delle altre, cioè l'incubatore deve essere un soggetto, un luogo, un'idea, va bene, che deve essere chiaramente proattiva. Non si può pensare che l'incubatore è l'equivalente di un affittacamere. L'incubatore deve offrire delle cose. E anche qui parlare dell'offerta dei servizi dell'incubatore, beh ragazzi, mi piace poco dentro l'università. Non è questione di offrire dei servizi, cioè il luogo dove c'è la cucina in comune, la frutta, il microonde, o aiutatemi voi, i parcheggi per la moto, piuttosto che la stanza con il wifi. No, l'incubatore avrebbe dovuto attivarsi con attività di supporto, motivazionali, formative, se volete continuo, ve ne dico tante, però, ecco, tutto questo messo un po' insieme tende a generare dei parcheggi dove all'inizio ci si crogiano molto sull'idea che sia una nuova idea, che probabilmente qualche cosa accadrà nel breve, no? Poi questo breve non si realizza e non si realizza, perché poi abbiamo visto, non si realizza. Allora le grandi paure sono generare dei luoghi dove c'è un confronto costante e continuo, ma un confronto costante e continuo con dei soggetti competenti. Farsi anche dire da qualcuno, no, questa non è un'idea che sta sul mercato, vuol dire probabilmente trovare tutti i dati e accettare che quell'idea effettivamente non sta sul mercato, o anche generare una reazione forte. No, questa idea sta sul mercato, ora ti dimostro come faccio, mi ammazzo, mi metto al lavoro giorno e notte, trovo, faccio qualcosa. Capite che cosa voglio dire? Perché poi l'impresa è anche fatta di questa sorta di capacità grippante, no? Di soggetti che si attaccano, diciamo, alle loro competenze piuttosto che agli elementi che nel mercato gli consentono la sopravvivenza. Ecco, se noi questa roba qui pensiamo che nel settore delle start-up non ci deve essere, siamo distanti anni luce da quello che dovrebbe. Questo è fondamentale. Quindi potrei citare tante altre cose, tanti altri errori che sono stati fatti anche in buona fede negli incubatori e negli acceleratori, anche perché comunque si tratta di portare anche dentro gli atenei, dentro questi luoghi, delle nuove competenze, delle nuove capacità, dei nuovi livelli manageriali. E in questi luoghi non è facile, spesso perché sono nati come, diciamo, spazi, d'accordo, nell'ambito dei soggetti pubblici, non privati, quindi anche la capacità di ingaggio di figure professionali nuove non è semplice, spesso si si è provato a lavorare con i volontari che in qualche modo hanno provato un'attività di reskilling, a volte è successa, a volte è andata bene, altre volte di meno, ma ce ne sono tante di cose che si possono dire. Il problema qual è? Che poi tutti questi elementi che generano degli insuccessi messi insieme creano un disastro.
E quindi poi
alla
fine poi creano il mood per cui non si crea. Guarda,
così.
io faccio vedere una cosa, prima poi di lasciare la parola a Carlo Alberto Carnevale Maffè dell'Università Bocconi, farvi vedere pochi secondi di questo video, no? Quando noi andiamo all'università ci troviamo davanti ai dei ragazzi e sono prevalentemente quelli che noi trattiamo sono prevalentemente dei nerd, noi siamo nel mondo dell'intelligenza artificiale, sono ingegneri, ma io infatti l'altro giorno qualcuno dice: ma quanti ne avete visti di questi ragazzi che prendono, vanno a aprire una partita IVA dal commercialista, ma non ne hanno neanche, guarda, il massimo sogno che hanno è fare la pubblicazione, diventare a fare un PhD, ma non hanno proprio questo pensiero. Per farvi vedere di chi si tratta, vi faccio vedere qualche secondo di questo video, che sono i ragazzi che hanno fondato, dopo il nostro percorso di venture lead a Lecce, una startup che oggi è già un bel successo, si chiama Snapproof. Ma se voi ci aveste parlato quando l'ho lanciata, quello che avrebbero detto è: nessuno di noi aveva la minima idea di lanciare una startup quando ce l'avete detto, pensavamo scherzaste. Guardiamo un attimo chi sono questi ragazzi. Questa è l'Università di Lecce, il suono c'è? No. Audio?
Tutto è iniziato quando era l'inizio del 2022
e il professor Carlo invece l'abbiamo conosciuto nel 2017.
Matteo era già un mio compagno di studi.
Con Emanuele abbiamo iniziato il corso seminario insieme.
Mi ero appassionato molto in quel periodo all'ingegneria del software.
E il corso di principi di progettazione del software.
Stavo finendo il mio percorso di studi triennale.
Avevo appena preso servizio come ricercatore.
Ho deciso di chiedergli la tesi alla triennale per poi richiedergliela anche alla magistrale.
Ho pensato di contattare il professor Carlo.
Proprio in quel periodo Emanuele, Simone e Matteo mi hanno spontaneamente chiesto la tesi.
Ci siamo visti nel suo ufficio in cui...
Ecco, questi sono i ragazzi con cui abbiamo a che fare. Sono ragazzi geniali, hanno un talento incredibile, noi italiani produciamo una quantità di innovazione pazzesca in altissima tecnologia, poi però ci scontriamo con la realtà. Nessuno di questi ragazzi aveva la minima idea di poter trasformare la loro tesi, il loro progetto, in una startup. Oggi loro sono una startup, si chiama Snapproof, una startup che sta generando già un discreto successo, ognuno di loro quindi è uno shareholder di un'azienda che sta andando tra l'altro già con dei clienti, che si sta sviluppando, ma nessuno di questi aveva la minima idea. A mio giudizio questo, e quindi confermo le tue parole Alessio, dato che questo è un caso di successo di aver portato il venture B all'università, è un auspicio per visionare come anche altri ragazzi, altri giovani che non hanno magari tutte quelle opportunità che possiamo vedere qua al Politecnico Bocconi, ma che si trovano a Lecce, a Rende, a Cosenza, a Catania, a Sassari, e dove c'è un brain drain potentissimo, possono avere l'opportunità di creare start-up magari di valore globali e che possono poi scalare e trasformare magari il valore non soltanto qui a Milano ma magari nella loro città di origine. Io quindi ti ringrazio Alessio, era proprio un esempio da fare per... A questo punto darei la parola al professor Carlo Carnevale Maffè.
Mi serve questo?
No. Sì.
No,
tanto ti sentono praticamente.
Questo magari per
questo sì, grazie.
Esatto, cioè, infatti voleva fare lezioni direttamente dalla Bocconi, che da qui si sente.
There are three kind of people. Serial killers, they make at least 2 crimes. Okay? Serial entrepreneurs, that makes several crimes. And then parallel entrepreneurs that make huge number of crimes. So welcome in a place where parallel entrepreneurs make this killer machine becomes an industry. We manufacture firms. And I would like to elaborate the concept why venture building is a superior model for not every startup, but definitely for technology and deep technology startups, for many reasons that I like to explain. This is a chart from Max, not from me, but it's, I would say, it's deceptive. You know why? Because it looks like making a startup is kind of a chain, right? Is a sequence. No, it's not. It's a chain reaction. Indeed, on a venture builder, the essential approach is not serial, it's parallel. So, because time is of the essence. And when in a startup environment, especially in deep tech, timing is everything. If you're late, you're dead. If you're too early, you die before reaching fresh air. Because technology sets the pace. Vado bene in inglese così?
You are wonderful. Also Max, I think, is appreciating a
No,
lot.
I'll do it for Max.
Yeah.
Indeed, studios have been booming as a business model, especially in the US, in the northern part of Europe. Less so in Italy because, I don't know why, but we do our job. As probably many of you know, I am independent director of FoolFarm. So I'm the watchdog of Andrea. Per quello che posso fare, ragazzi. Non è facile. No, it's possible. These are the numbers of Max. Let me go through them because these numbers here are essential. This is the time saving, and again, when in a startup, when in a technology environment, time is everything. And saving time to capital, which is the fundamental KPI of a startups in our process, time to capital. You know, a venture builder builds production means. We don't build products, we build producers. You see the point? So for us, the critical time is not time to market. That's a startup business. Our critical time is time to capital. Because we make startups and we sell startups. And our market is the capital market. It must be clear for all of us. You know? So reducing the time to capital, reducing the time to all the phases of capital. And you need to learn that these are critical phases. And that's the standardization of phases, Series A, Series B, IPO for whatever, okay? And if you look at that number of reduction of time, it's a critical, absolutely critical achievement. If I can quote another fundamental research, which is the GSSN research on disrupting the venture landscape, 2022, net numbers are very close to the numbers that Max has came up with. So a 50% reduction from 0 to Series A, 1/3 of the time from seed to seed, and again, 40% less time to Series A. So there is a consistent research results showing that venture builders are time-oriented for delivering an appropriate level of organizational, say, maturity to access capital. And again, let us speak expressly to the fact that attracting the right capital at the right time is the fundamental industrial contribution of venture builder. Why venture builder are better than venture capital? Better. They are better for the initial phase. Venture capital, and Andrea, you know that I've been serving as a director of one of the largest venture capital fund in Italy. We handle about €500 million worth of funds, all invested in technology. But you know, in a venture capital, you don't know the timing. You don't know. You put the money and then you have an undefined horizon. In a venture builder, time is a decision, time is a choice, time is a result of a process. It is not an unknown factor. It is known ex ante. That's a fundamental element. And the other comparison is why venture builder may address the common reasons for failure of startups in a better way. Not all of them, but some of them are better treated in a venture builder. Let me go through them. This is the survey made by CB Insight on the post-mortem analysis on more than 100 venture capital and venture builder cases of bankrupt or failure in startup. The first, again, is where venture builder have a competitive advantage. We can manage a better timing to the raising of capital. Whereas in the venture capital approach, this is not under your control. The second element, it's external, it's exogenous, so it doesn't depend on which way you build a startup. But for instance, flawed business model, that's definitely an element where venture builder provide an advantage, because we typically support startups with senior, with mentors, with advisors that have gray hair. You know that myself and Andrea, we have a lot of gray hair. So a lot of experience, so they have a better understanding of business model. Regulatory legal challenges. We have Marisa here. Our legal department is probably the most important pillar in understanding, and especially you guys are working in a European context. I mean, we don't even go to the bathroom without consulting the regulators here, okay? You know that whenever a technology appears, the Americans make a lot of money. The Chinese copy the technology, and the European make a beautiful regulation. This is exactly how it works. So addressing regulatory challenges. Not the right team, that's another fundamental element. Of course, technically speaking, in economic theory, the human capital of a startup is what's called a specific asset, asset specificity. It is not interchangeable. In a venture builder, you have a broader pool of human capital, and you can rotate them. So you have much more flexibility in the team composition. So you reduce the risk of not having the right team, because you can replace people, you have a panchina lunga, lo dico in italiano che si capisce. And the other way is that we have a better track record for funding. So 60% of startups from venture builder reach funding versus a lower number of traditional startups. So why the reasons to join a venture builder and not a generic accelerator or incubator? Because venture builder is a factory. It's not a place. It's a process. It's not, tables and rooms and physical asset. So finance is the first fundamental element, and total time to exit. It's shorter, overall risk of return, it's lower. But what is more important, because we're focusing on deep tech, is that we have economies of scale and scope on technology. Because you can leverage on intellectual property, licensing, existing infrastructure, cloud, IaaS and PaaS, and that's a fundamental element, because you start, launched on a platform. And that organization, joining a team in a venture builder gives you more opportunity, more flexibility. You can choose different roles, you can rotate, you can learn more. If you fail, and it happens, and we are open to failure, you don't get scared. Failing is a learning process. And here you can fail fast and start over again with very little problem. So there are especially organizational advantages in venture builder, because you can launch a startup more rapidly, you can provide access to talent with more experience in business model, and you have a broader pool of competencies and expertise, especially, and that's the case of FoolFarm, where you have a structure of mentors, a structure of supporters, of suggestions, where you can discuss. So it lowers the risk profile of the startup. It's a tacit capital that cannot be described, but it's so valuable because you have a community in the background. And for those of you that are interested in joining a startup, of course, it's a lower risk career. You have more opportunities. You may pick and choose the role and the startups that you like. and you become a parallel entrepreneur rather than a serial entrepreneur. So you have a broader portfolio, and that's, if you like, there is a portfolio theory behind it. Okay? In a startup, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. Okay? In a venture builder, you have many kitchens and many chickens. Okay?
Many chickens.
So finally, I'll leave it with this number. Connected with local communities. Venture capitals put their money anywhere. A venture builder have roots. We have roots in specific places with specific culture. And having roots is important because you get to know people, you get build trust, you get to get a linkage with the stakeholders. Well, financially, you might have, well, that's the statistics, potential higher multiples, more efficient processes, you can leverage on a network, and moreover, you get great teams. It's just a better working environment because you can really distribute your interest across several opportunities, and you get help and you give help. So let me conclude by saying venture builder is a different asset class, financially speaking, because we have a lower risk, we have a lower time to capital, we have a better, say, rotation of human capital, so the total capital employed, whether financial capital or human capital, have a higher level of efficiency. And there are simulation numbers that will tell you that, venture builders, venture studios have a return to capital that is twice as much, 2.3 times as much as the comparative approach of venture capital. So, to conclude, we have all these boxes, with cats inside. And whether they are alive or dead, we don't know. So don't even ask. They may be dead or alive or both. It's a quantic business, okay? But the most important thing is that you need to think outside of the box. And that's a little dirty secret of running a venture builder. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. A questo punto penso che abbiamo avuto una bellissima serata. I think that we have a very nice event. Please, Max, come in together with me. 3 fantastic guests. You can meet after the meeting and discuss, have questions. But I hope that today we have a more clear idea about the venture builder phenomenon. And I invite also Max to return in Italy if we wish. You see that we have quite a bit of experience and we are working hardly on these topics. So thank you very much, especially for your studies, for your creative study that you had. And I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that also, Carlo, you enjoyed the meeting. And Alessio, we'll see you next Monday to start in the University of Sassari our experience. Grazie mille.
Ciao!
Well, it's time to